Built for structured logging, Seek lets you filter and exclude events by type, search by event properties, build dashboards, and configure alerts in seconds. Seek helps you troubleshoot and resolve issues more efficiently than ever before. Available as a simple Windows installer or Docker image, try Seek for free now at datalust.co/SEQ. That's datalust.co/SEQ. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Kiki Prottsman. She's the Director of Education for Microsoft and MakeCode. How are you?
Doing great. How are you today?
I am doing all right. I'm looking at your LinkedIn and I'm just seeing all kinds of thoughtfulness around education. But you have a master's in computer science. Are you an educator or are you a computer person or are you both?
I'm both and so much more, but I was a computer person first. Actually, since I was very, very young, I was a computer person, and I was just always curious why none of my friends were and why people didn't seem to understand how fun and creative it was. And so then that led me to become an educator.
Yeah. And when you said you're so much more, because you're kind of a multi-hyphenate. I mean, you've written books and you do writing and you do art. And I'm curious if computers are at the heart of all of that, or if it's really just that you're a creator and then the computer is a tool.
You know, both, I think. I think I started out as a creator with the computer as a tool and then saw that I could make the computer dance, do what I wanted it to do. And I thought that was exciting. But then in my kind of mission to try and get other people to understand that computers were amazing and fun and a great medium for creation, then I became an educator. I started putting out materials to help other people understand. And really, it's about building that self-confidence more than even building computer science knowledge.
One of the most popular podcast episodes I've ever done was one on systems thinking, where I talked with one of our guests who said that we should stop trying to worry about kids learning to code and start teaching them about systems. And you actually worked on a book called Computational Thinking and Coding for Every Student. You could have just called that book Coding for Every Student, but you put computational thinking at the beginning of that title, which seems like a significant decision to me.
It absolutely is. And just like I was saying before, it's one thing to know how to code. It's completely another thing to understand why you want to code or why you even need to make something. And if you have the confidence to kind of think outside the box and understand that there are problems and understand how to tackle the problems, then you understand why you would need computing and computer science, and learning to code without that other stuff is horrible, boring, terrible torture.
Why do you think that some people seem to come pre-wired for computational thinking and then other people need it to like click on and then they go, oh, I get it now? Because my wife, as an example, is a nurse and she has an MBA and she's very highly educated, but she's not finding computational thinking to be intuitive. And we've tried to explore that. Is it because where she grew up or what she was exposed to early, or maybe she had a different teacher, or are people wired one way or the other? Because there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. It's a really good question, but I think at the heart of it, and I'll use an example. I recently went to a Code Ninjas outfit, and they've got Code Ninjas scattered across the US. And I met this girl who was learning to code, and I was asking, what made you want to do this? What do you like about it? And she said, the problem solving. It's like puzzles. It's a one big puzzle. She didn't do it for the game she comes out with at the end. She didn't do it so that all her friends know she can code. She did it because she likes the challenge of figuring stuff out. And I think that people who are naturally predisposed to want to figure things out or find a better way to do things, or, go against the grain a little bit, they already have a lot of the skills that are fundamental in computational thinking. Whereas other people who usually they're quite educated, probably well-behaved, and have gone very far in life, a lot of times you have to play by rules in order to make that kind of stuff happen, or you have to do what other people tell you to do. And you might find that the steps in computational thinking go against the things that you learned in order to adapt and get yourself to be where you were.
That is really interesting because, again, using my wife with her permission as an example, she's on puzzles probably an hour and a half a day, whether it be Wordle or what are these different word games where you have to move your finger around and write out a word, or from the available letters. I mean, she's constantly doing puzzles. But then when we talk about like writing a macro in Excel, often what she's being asked to do does not line up with her belief of how it should work. So then she's like, well, I'm not interested in that. Like, I couldn't connect to that network drive because it didn't work the way I thought it would work. So it's really interesting to see someone who is super puzzle focused and can attack a puzzle in any way, then be given the puzzle of like how to be a computer person and then reject it. And it makes me wonder that you and I as computer people may have made the computer less friendly than it needs to be for everyone to be able to be a computational thinker.
I don't think that's so far off. I do think there's another phenomenon I've come in contact with, which is some people put up mental blocks, and once they cross into an area, they immediately think everything is harder than it actually is. For me, this happens with, I don't know, sometimes cooking. I'll be like, I can't make that. That's a lot of steps. But if you just follow the steps, each of the steps is easy. But I just put up this mental block where, because it's that, it must be harder. And I think that also happens a lot with technology and computer science. You might be saying, oh, don't worry, it's just a function. It's super easy. It's just like any other code. You're just giving it a name, and then you can use it multiple places. But other people aren't hearing that, and their brain isn't open to, oh yeah, of course. It's automatically like, okay, now you've gone into a level I just have no idea what you're talking about. So it could fall along those lines too.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. One of the things that I've been noticing as I've been raising my kids is sometimes their brain is open to seeing an overwhelming amount of information, and the overwhelmedness is energizing. And then in other times when their brain isn't ready for it, the overwhelmedness, I'm making up a word there, is in fact the deterrent. So, when I see a new piece of code or like a complete application, like, look at this, it's 5,000 lines of perfect code. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited to dive in. And another time I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh, I could never do that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And this is something that we look at a lot in education. And it's one of the reasons that we focus on just-in-time hints or just-in-time learning. I think many of us who have advanced degrees, we've been in classes before where the professor is just telling you all sorts of in-depth information, and you don't want to take it in. You don't have room in your brain to take it in. It feels like that they're just talking to your forehead because you aren't understanding. And yet you go home, you start working on your assignment for that day, and then you desperately wish you had those exact words coming back to you, because now you're ready to accept that information and actually understand what it's trying to say because you have a little more experience. This happens everywhere, that you try and prepare people by telling them what they need to know, but they aren't ready to be prepared. You kind of have to wait for them to say, okay, now I want that information, or now I want to have this experience. And then they just drink it up.
Yeah. I also feel like note-taking and also telling people to sleep and then come back at it, like those two tools are underutilized. I'm trying to teach my kids to like, write it down. I don't want to write it down. It takes energy and effort. No, but if you write it down and you go to sleep, your brain will be different in the morning. I promise. You just need a sleep for your subconscious to absorb that and figure it out. You're not going to figure out computers in a single day.
Isn't that the truth? Oh, but if we could.
Indeed. The other thing I'm starting to realize is that the way that I'm going to say you and I, I'm going to use you and I because you and I are now contemporaries in this analogy, like learned over many years, and there were new things that came out and new technologies that came out. So, I learned on things like GeoCities, and I started with HTML before JavaScript was a thing. And I started in C before Java and C# were things. So the idea of a a language that manages its own memory wasn't really a thing.
Mm.
So the water level kind of got slowly increased, and I didn't feel like I was drowning. But now we just throw people into the deep end and we say, React and JavaScript and this and that, da, 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 and the stack is so much deeper than it was. I don't know where to start when there's so much history that the younger early in career people don't know.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. It's at first I used to kind of compare it to learning to drive a stick versus an automatic, right?
Oh, my
We only
favorite
had,
analogy.
yeah, we only had stick, and now there's automatic, and people are like, why would you ever learn a stick? But there's so much more now too. When I was young, you had QDOS as your operating system. And then I think I learned on basic, and there
Mm-hmm.
was just very little on your machine that you could even learn. And so then there was a place to start, like a clear kind of place to start. And then you grew with it. But now there are so many, not only languages, but applications for those languages. And do you want to do video game console stuff or web stuff or phone stuff or, just so many different options. And sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And when I go and I teach teachers how to teach coding to their student, and now that's a whole separate topic because now you have teachers who are trying to teach something to students that they never learned in school, which just isn't a thing that happens. But here it is with computer science. And you have to reassure them and we get that you don't understand it all and that you feel like you've barely cracked that tip of the iceberg. But don't let that stop you because a little bit is often enough. And it's enough until it's no longer enough for you. And even Bill Gates himself probably doesn't know everything about all the different CS disciplines out there.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just too much to cover. So start somewhere, be
Yeah.
comfortable with that, make sure it aligns to your enjoyments and your
Mm-hmm.
excitements. And then if you need to know more, learn more.
I love that you brought up the stick shift analogy. So I want to test out something on you and see what you think, because I've used that analogy before. It's one of my favorites. So I've got this, my son now just got his driver's permit last week, and my parents said, all right, this is exciting. You have a driver's permit. Hey, Scott, you want to learn to drive? You have to change your oil. You have to learn how to change a tire. You have to understand how the internal combustion engine works. You have to drive a stick shift, and then we'll let you borrow the car. And they thought that was a great way to set me up for success. But looking back on it, it was a kind of gatekeeping.
Mm.
But they were also still right. So how do you balance gatekeeping? Like, hey, Kiki, before I give you C#, you need to learn assembler, and then C, and then, which will make you a more well-rounded T-shaped developer, but also could destroy your motivation.
Wow, that was my college career, actually. Um, there's a difference. I think your parents had foresight. Your parents knew they wanted to make you a stronger driver, but not just a driver, someone who understood the automobile. And that's great. It's certainly not for everybody. And it's true that depending on someone else's circumstances, if they had to do stuff, they'd just never get to drive. And so in a way, it becomes kind of an equity issue. You had someone who cared enough to probably also show you things if you didn't know how to do them. Some people don't. I think we're in a day and age now that we've got Uber, we've got AAA,
Mm-hmm.
and your kids don't necessarily need all that to be safe on the road anymore. I think the same thing is true in technology. If you want to be a developer, if this is going to be the world you live in, yeah, you need to know all the accoutrements. But if you just want to be able to make your Excel spreadsheets more versatile
Mm-hmm.
and be able to do something that makes your job easier, then the shortcuts are just fine. And the rest of the stuff will kind of come around.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because it really is about balance. Like, do you need to know these things? No, not really. Are you going to be more well-rounded if you do know them? Yeah, that's a fair non-gatekeeping type statement. I was really excited about myself last week because I replaced a bunch of my faucets in my bathroom and in my kitchen. And my brother, who is quite handy and very much a person with a garage and a lot of tools, was kind of teasing me a little bit because I'm hitting 50 here and I'm now learning how to do my home plumbing. but
Uh-huh.
I felt really accomplished. And he's like, why didn't you learn this 30 years ago? And it's like, well, I didn't really need to. But now
Uh-huh.
I felt really good. I was like, I'm really handy. Like now I know what happens underneath the sink. And we should celebrate those moments because now I don't know what happens after the sink. Like it just disappears into a hole, goes off into the world in a bit, a puff of smoke. But now at least I know that last 2 feet there. So I took the call stack of my faucet and I went down, a couple of call frames, which makes me happy.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I recently did something similar. I'm in my mid 40s and I was made fun of by my ex-husband for not knowing how to change my own tire, for
Mm-hmm.
never going outside, gardening, forget about it,
Mm.
and barely ever using a tool. And now here I am, like 15 some years after our divorce. I just gutted my SUV and totally rebuilt it to be kind of a portable camping vehicle. I built a bed out of aluminum that folds up and gets stored when I'm tooling around and I can pull it out. And I redid the electrical system so that I have all this 12-volt wiring that I can pull from for all different areas of the car and stuff that somebody I knew in my younger years never would have thought me capable of.
Mm.
And, and in part, thanks to having a lot of time at home over the last couple of years, I challenged myself to figured it out. And now I'm at this place where I can do all sorts of weird, crazy things. I think we, again, as contemporaries come from this day and age where if you were going to play in this space, you had to be a card carrying computer person. You had to prove that you can go through these hoops. And the world is changing in a way where let's let everybody play. We have all sorts of entry points now and people can just come in and start something when they want to start it. And if they don't want to learn the proper stuff until they're in their 40s, let them. Now, that said, there are, like, if you want to truly get this stuff, understand this stuff, grok where it's all coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's an A that leads to a B that leads to a C. That's probably like the proper way to come into this space and understand everything and be a pro. But not everybody's going to be interested in that. And it might actually shoo a lot of people away. So if we let people come in at any of these entry points that they're interested in, and then if they need it, they can go back and get all that knowledge. It might be a little harder, but
Mm-hmm.
it might appeal to more types of people throughout their entire lives.
Yeah, we really need to break down the idea of, is it too late to do a thing? Like, of course, my toxic trait is thinking that it's not too late for me to win an Oscar when I don't actually act at all right now. But it could happen, right? Like I could change everything, move to LA. But people on my TikTok are commenting like, I'm 35. Is it too late to learn computers? And I'm like, oh, you're doing amazing, sweetie. Like, no, you can absolutely, like, it's literally never too late. So why have we told them that you have to come out at like age 5 with a computer and be coding? Like if you haven't done your first app by 9, then really it's over for you.
Yeah, you're so behind. I think it relates back to this idea of language processing, right? We have this psychology, this understanding that kids learn faster when they're younger. And if they're going to learn a language, the younger they learn it, the more intuitive it will be, and the easier they'll be able to recall it when they get older. And because computer science relates to language and really a lot of those humanities really closely, I think we tend to also assume that. And if you think back in the day, the joke was about programming a VCR, right? You get your kid to do it because the adult can't figure it out. There's just a stigma that once you get older, you can't do new things, can't teach an old dog new tricks. See, there's even a saying about it, but it's all fake. It might be easier to learn 20 different languages when you're young, but it doesn't mean that you can't learn the ones that are most important to you when you get older.
My great uncle passed away in his 90s. And when I gave him his first computer, I think he was 85, I gave him a laptop and a scanner and a bunch of stuff. And he had no preconceived notions of it. This is someone who kind of like fought in the war and had no concept that computers are a thing, right? That's about all he knew about them.
Mhm.
And I said, well, the first thing you need to know is you can't break it. You can't hurt it. And then, go have fun. And it was so funny. He would see like a meme and he couldn't figure out how to get it to me. So he would like print it out, take a picture of it, and then text it.
Oh, I love it.
You know what I mean?
Oh.
Or he couldn't figure out how to get it off his phone. So he'd take his phone, put it on the scanner, and the scanner had a button that would automatically scan it, make an attachment, and email it. So then I would get scanned pictures of his phone with the meme on the thing. And I'm not going to correct him because he freaking solved the problem,
Mhm.
And honestly, he got it down to like a button push, right? Yeah. Someone sent me a meme. I put the phone down, face down on the scanner, and I push the button and it goes to my grandson. Like, good on him for solving that without worrying about the correct way. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially there's so many mindsets, so many things you can do in life that bring you into a great mindset for computers. One of them is music. Of course, there's so many connections between music and computers, but anything where you use tools, you understand if your tool has limitations, you can choose to add another tool or find ways to use those limitations to your advantage. I think that's a beautiful example of that. I also want to go back to where you were talking about saying you can't break it. And I
That
think
was the moment.
mhm, this is so important. I taught at the University of Oregon for several years, and
Mhm.
I would often teach the kind of 101, 111 type classes. And I had a lady who was in her mid 40s and she was not completing her assignments in the beginning. And I was concerned. I called her in to talk to her because she knew what she was talking about in class. She just wouldn't do the programming. And through talking, we discovered that in her previous marriage, she had had an abusive relationship and she had once broken her ex-husband's machine and faced severe retribution for
Oh
having
no.
done so. So she had the stigma in her head around how expensive technology was and how
Mm.
fragile it could be. And she was just terrified to take this laptop and spend a good amount of time on it, doing something that she wasn't comfortable with. And it really took helping her understand that whatever she could possibly get herself into, that the university could help her get out of, whether it be me helping her undo something she might have done, or the technology station helping to repair something that had broken.
Mhm.
She was gonna be fine, and that changed everything. She became an amazing student. But that technical block, that block that we put up for ourselves, can be really, really devastating in this space.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. And setting up systems when you're either by yourself or working in a team by which, like, of course you could drop it or you could break it, you can hurt it, but the fear that you typing on the thing would delete all of your files
Mm.
is the same fear that we have. Like, I don't want to break production, or I don't want to drop that table in production. And if you can do that, then the system isn't set up for you to succeed, right? If there isn't oh
Mhm.
crap, push a button, put it back, roll back production, or code reviews, or DevOps, or systems in place to prevent an early in career engineer from taking down prod, sets up systems where people can fail without fear and worry that, oh no, I'm the one that dropped that table in prod. Well,
Mhm.
why weren't there little picket fences to prevent you from stepping in the garden?
Yep. And at the same time, we all need to step in the garden, crush a flower, get stung by a bee so that we
Hmm.
we learn what's going on. But yeah,
Exactly.
yep,
Hopefully in
I hear you.
staging, though.
Right?
JD, years ago, I set up an automated build server. They didn't have a name for it. Now it's called CI/CD, and then it became DevOps. We just had a batch file that ran on a cron job, and it made us feel different about our software. But even years later, we were still digging around in log files to try to, like a forensic scientist, to solve a murder. Look at the log files, and customers would email us log files, and personal information would get sent around. You all saw that was a problem at Raygun, and you came up with a way to do automated error logging at scale.
Yeah. Well, we originally sold some products that integrated with things like Visual Studio, and we didn't get that visibility about the faults. And what we found was that when we did instrument and automate our software in this way, that only about 1% of users who experienced issues would actually post in our forums or request support. And that led us to think our software quality was better than it was. And once we put Raygun in there and started watching this, we're like, oh my goodness, this is frankly a little bit embarrassing. But now we know how to go and fix all these really weird, edge case things that customers were encountering.
It's so powerful. I had a small iPhone app I did with my buddy as a startup, and I had no idea that people behind authenticated proxies couldn't use our app. Had no idea. And I started getting emails with call stacks from Raygun that said, Monday morning, 50 people, 75 people within the last 5 hours, this one specific error has been going on. I realized that people were using our product behind a corporate firewall, and Raygun was letting us know that they launched, it failed, and it poofed. So the customer experience was it started and it went away, but Raygun sent us to the line number. That was the issue, is authenticated proxies. It's amazing.
It's absolutely about helping developers solve problems quickly. But ultimately, why do we write software? It's for end users, and we need to understand what's the impact on them. And we all know the saying, "You don't know what you don't know." Raygun helps turn that from "you don't know what you don't know" to "now you do know."
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And folks can sign up at raygun.com, get a trial. It'll honestly, no matter what language you're using, it take you a couple hours maybe. I've seen you do it in 10 minutes. If you want to do it really right and do it perfect, maybe take an hour or two, and you'll have automated error logging reporting set up on your application, no matter what language you use. So you work on MakeCode, and folks can check it out at MakeCode.com. This is not Visual Studio. This is not Visual Studio Code. This is something else.
Yeah. Our hope is that it will lead people to be very interested in going on to Visual Studio. But this is kind of that step right underneath. This is that area for people who are worried about merging code or don't even know what merging code is, or just want to kind of play around for themselves. It starts with block-based languages, so you don't have to worry about syntax or any of that. You can really start understanding the idea of sequence and building something based off of an algorithm you have in your own head. And you can follow tutorials. You can have a game in as little as 3 blocks. Like, you can do some really fun stuff really quick for yourself or for students or for, a gift. And then you slowly start to be able to graduate from that. So we have a little toggle that you flip in order to go from blocks to either JavaScript or Python. And you can keep working in the same environment you're already comfortable with. So you're not changing all your worlds at once. And then once you're kind of comfortable in those text-based languages, the idea is you can move on to something bigger like a VS Code and keep creating.
Mm-hmm. Even as someone who's been coding for now going on 30 years, flipping to block-based coding and the ability to flip back and forth between JavaScript and blocks or Python and blocks has helped me have a better understanding about, why is it textual? Why do I have to look at it like this? I kind of wish I could do that in C# and other languages. I feel like block-based coding is gets the stigma that it's a toy, but I think it's actually a very cool visual way to look at instructions, and I'm kind of sad we don't use it more.
Oh, yeah. And we actually had a raging argument on our TikTok about whether block-based coding was real coding. And the funny thing is, this is JavaScript behind the scenes in our blocks, which, again, people have an argument about whether JavaScript can really be called coding. I personally love it. But I find that, granted, I make the curriculum, and a lot of what we're focused on right now is the block-based, but I'm working in block-based intentionally because it just tells such a story when you're looking at it. And I've heard lots of people talk about this analogy, but I love to use the analogy of the Matrix, where you're looking at code, whether it be someone else's or your own that you wrote a while ago, and it just all seems like you don't even understand what's happening. You're just seeing these zeros and ones falling from the sky. But at some point, you can look at the exact same thing and it all makes sense. You have this visual. You can see where you are in the world and what's happening, and you become the master of this domain that you can just move to your will and make it do what you want. And with blocks, we kind of get rid of the whole process of struggling to understand what's being said, because the blocks are in very clear orders. They're in everyday speak, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
They're very understandable. So you can hop right in and get what's going on. And you don't have to have that struggle moment that messes with your confidence before you get to something deeper.
Mm-hmm. One of the most magical things that I like about MakeCode, which I think more people should know about, is MakeCode Arcade, because it's one thing to like learn Hello World the way you and I learned it, which was like, you're in a text mode console. The screen is all black and the text is green, and I just made it say Hello World. And then I can't seem to impress my 16-year-old with that. But if I could make a game, plug in a piece of physical hardware that looks like a Nintendo Switch, or like a tiny Nintendo Switch with a circuit board exposed, and now the game jumps into the physical device and they can sit in the car and play the game, then they're like, well, hang on now, this is something I can work with. How is that possible? And there's so many different boards that MakeCode Arcade works on.
Yeah, we definitely have to tailor our exports for different chipsets, but we have so many possibilities of how to take your stuff and go. And one of the reasons this came about is we found that people are a lot more engaged with technology when it becomes something tangible, something they can play with. We kind of got our name working with Microbit, which is a little microcontroller, and we definitely still do a lot of Microbit. But Arcade really brought it into this world where you're having fun with your creations, and you can do it right on the screen, just like you can with Microbit. You don't ever have to have a microcontroller. But if you do have it, it's just literally you plug it in and click the download button, and you've taken your game with you so other people can play it, so that you can do it standing in line at the store or something. It's a real fun thing to experience, especially for the first time. And like I said earlier, there is a game that you can make that's pretty entertaining that is 3 or 4 lines of code. You literally make it so that when you press your A button, it adds a point, and you have a timer that counts down, and you see how many times you can click a button in 10 seconds. And 3 lines of code, 4 lines of code, downloaded onto a little thing. You could be playing that all day long.
Yeah. And you can get this up to like, you could build like a little Legend of Zelda clone. You could build a whole RPG. So this thing scales to a really impressive amount of complexity with all kinds of sprites and 100+ game mechanics that you could do. And they'll all work either in the browser in an emulator, which means you don't need a physical piece of hardware, or one of these little tiny, Game Boy style devices that you can take with you.
Yeah. And you can even toss the link to yourself with a text, and you can play it on your phone. And the really neat thing about this, obviously the super unique thing is the ability to keep building in JavaScript or Python once you've kind of reached the end of what you can do with blocks. But the blocks are much more extensible than people realize too. You can actually create your own blocks, either using blocks and saving it as an extension, or using JavaScript or Python and saving those as an extension, so that you can access things you can't access on the surface. You can dig deeper and make things that you can access from blocks. And the reason I love that is, as an educator, that means you can take some ideas that are more blocks than are practical for a beginner and consolidate it all into a single block that the kids can use to get some of that harder stuff out of the way. And that's a lot of fun. I think about it. I remember learning C and C++, and how many lines of code you had to write just to say hello world. And to be able to take someone younger and introduce them to the same thing, or take someone hesitant and be able to introduce them to the same thing, all by making a little library so that they have a more simple way to get started. I think that's really powerful too.
Such a wonderful time to learn how to code. It's a great time to be a developer. Thank you so much, Kiki, for chatting with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is great.
I've been chatting with Kiki Prottsman. You can check out the great work that she and the team are doing at MakeCode.com, or if you want to jump directly in and go past the homepage, you can go to arcade.makecode.com. There's a ton of great stuff up there for Minecraft, for arcade games, for the microbit, as well as educational curriculum for students and teachers. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.